This is a 1968 discovery. It's evidence of Roman crucifixion, a 7-inch iron spike lodged in a man's heel. He was buried with it. They couldn't get it out. We're more familiar with crucifixion paintings like this. Mantegna's Renaissance work called Crucifixion. Classical history teaches us with weight. Crucifixion is a heavy topic. Romans use it to keep their kingdoms in line. This is the second lesson in a trilogy. We learn how Jesus was crucified and later Peter. Emperor Tiberius rules now. We go to his classical kingdom of Judea. Romans have their one God problem in the kingdom of the Jews. The Jews know Roman authority will crush dissent through the public terror of crucifixion. But what exactly did Jesus and Peter do that put them on a cross? In Lesson 59, you heard kingdom teachings of Jesus. Now I want to introduce you to Pontius Pilate and to the man who joins Jesus' kingdom of heaven with some struggle. His name is Simon Peter. I'm Mr. Hall. This is Ancient History. Welcome to Classical Kingdoms, where history reveals truth and wisdom for your journey. We take the classical approach to history, grounded in what actually matters, like Roman crucifixion and a restored shepherd who is called the first pope. How did Roman authority work? I want to take you to Jerusalem at the time of Jesus to learn about it. How did Jesus' crucifixion actually happen? And what's the aftermath? That takes us to Peter. How did Peter transform in the virtue forge? Seeing Jesus crucified, what is Peter's fate? By the end of this episode, you'll understand the crucifixion of Jesus, the Roman one God problem that will become the new Christian religion. Let's begin. In AD 14, Augustus died. A new Caesar will take over. It's Tiberius. Tiberius is not the biological son of Augustus. He is the son by adoption. In Rome, that is enough. Roman adoption, adoptio, especially good for wealthy, family, childless Romans who could legally adopt a grown man. Julius Caesar did it. Julius Caesar adopted his great-nephew Octavian. Julius Caesar didn't have a son, an heir. And so then wealth can be transferred. Citizenship. In the case of Tiberius, now that Augustus holds the empire as a possession, as property, he transfers that to his adopted son, Tiberius. That's how Tiberius got his job. Lock the idea of adoption into your memory. In Rome, belonging to this ruling class, being adopted into it, it's very powerful and it's merit-based. Tiberius had to be useful and worth adopting. Tiberius was skilled. He had success. He showed promise. And that's how Tiberius became master of the Mediterranean world, like his father and his grandfather, arguably. Now, Tiberius will sit in his palace in Rome, or more likely sit in his secluded palace on Capri and rule the classical kingdoms all over the Mediterranean. We are going to the one that's about 1,500 miles away, and that classical kingdom is Judea. Who rules Judea? The Romans. Who belongs to this kingdom? The inhabitants of Judea, the Jewish people, they have great heritage, great history, and a monotheistic religion, but they belong to the Roman Empire. And how is loyalty shown? By keeping the peace, by making a token sacrifice to the imperial cult. And what protection is promised? The Romans are protecting the entire Pax Romana, the entire Mediterranean world. The Roman roads have a guard every mile. Protection is promised by the Romans. Judea is kind of a hot, dusty corner way off to the side of the Roman Empire, What does Tiberius really want? Why is he struggling with Judea? Well, for one, he needs that land bridge to connect Egypt. Egypt is part of the breadbasket. It's part of the Fertile Crescent. You know, Egypt especially feeds Rome. It's just a strategic location. Judea is a geographical buffer against the Parthian Empire. To the east, the Parthians are the only power known at this time that can really punch back at Rome. So Judea must be kept subdued. The taxes must flow. This is the Pax Romana. Rome has to enforce the peace and preserve the success, the economy, the strength of the Romans. So Tiberius needs a tough guy on the ground in Judea, especially since Tiberius is known to be a recluse. Now's the time to introduce you to Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate is the Roman prefect, the governor of Judea. From the year 26 to 36, he's in charge of the nuts and bolts, the operations. And to help him do this, he carries the jus gladii. That's Latin for the right of the sword. That's law. He can legally execute non-Roman citizens in his province. No appeals, no trial by jury, no Senate review or due process. This is one of the many tools that Pontius Pilate has. So justice in Judea is whatever Pilate needs. And it's Pilate's career that's on the line. You know, Pilate is an equestrian. What is an equestrian? That's the middle-ranking Roman nobility. You're lower than senators. You aspire to go higher. You're above merchants. Obviously, peasants are way below you. In 1961, archaeologists found where he worked in Caesarea, there was a limestone block, and it had been recycled, it had been flipped on its side to be a stepping stone of a future theater. This happens a lot in archaeology, these old buildings. That's why they look ruined. People used them as quarries. But for Pilate, his name was on the block, carved into that block. It's a physical artifact that bears his name, recycled into a stepping stone. So grasp the extent of his power as governor. He has the final call on Jesus' crucifixion. His own name was just reduced to a stair tread in Caesarea, where he worked normally. But he got his authority. He is ruling. He is helping Tiberius control the classical kingdom of Judea. Now, Pilate does not normally work in Jerusalem, but this lesson is mainly set in Jerusalem. He governs from Caesarea Maritima. That is the coastal stronghold. It was built by Herod the Great. It's a major port city. Caesarea has a theater. It has a vast temple, part of the imperial cult. That's where Roman citizens would worship the emperor as a god. And if you're coming here from lesson 57, I think I showed you some of those ruins. But check out the Sebastos harbor. This is magnificent. You can see the authority, the power, how useful this is. They had hydraulic concrete poured into this open sea area to create an artificial deep water port. Caesarea is where Pilate works. It's where the province is ruled from. So what are we doing in Jerusalem? Yeah, we're getting to that. The Romans are in charge. They can go wherever they want, but Caesarea is the 50,000-mile network hub where these Roman paved roads kind of begin and end in this province. And first and foremost, Roman roads are to deploy legions, to move the troops, and then extract taxes. So the protection offered, if you're a member of this, you see that the empire speaks with the roads with the iron rule. They rule with crucifixion. To maintain authority across 50,000 miles of road, that's just in this region, I think you deserve a real lesson, not a watered down lesson about the Roman cross, about crucifixion and what it is. And whether you're a Christ follower or not, it matters to Western civilization. Romans really matter. And the crucifixion is not Rome's only execution method. It was Rome's worst. The Romans called it servile supplicium, the slave's punishment. It's illegal to crucify a Roman citizen, except in the most extreme treason. The cross is really just for slaves, rebels, pirates, people who threaten the public order. Do you hear the theme? Pontius Pilate needs to maintain peace. The mechanics of crucifixion were engineered in a way to maximize suffering. The victim starts with a scourging. The scourging, you've been stripped naked, you're beaten with the cat of nine tails. It's like you're shredded. You're maintained. You're not broken, but you're bruised and you're crushed and you're shredded. And then you're forced to carry a cross beam all the way to the execution site. There, your arms are attached, usually nailed. Your body is hoisted up. Executioners would then attach this small wooden block, kind of a ledge, the sedile. That sedile is just enough of a kind of a seat or ledge to keep your lungs from collapsing too quickly. Asphyxiation is the real cause of death. You've been so beaten and weakened by this. And so if they can let you, push up on your heels and keep the breathing, keep your diaphragm moving, it can expand the agony. It can go beyond just hours. People can be hung on a cross for days. When Rome wanted the suffering to end, they've got to get on to other crucifixions, or they had political reasons, sundown, as we'll see here today. The soldiers would just go and smash the victim's legs. They had an iron rod that would do this. And once your legs are broken, the sedile doesn't help you. You're going to really suffocate. And once the breaking of the legs, within minutes, you're dead. That's the kind of authority we're talking about. It's very public. These crosses, these crucifixions were done on the roads, just outside the city gates. It's a system so that you could feel the might, feel the cost of the pain going against the Romans. If you're coming here from lesson 50, we covered the Spartacus slave revolt. 6,000 surviving rebels were nailed to crosses, lining the Appian Way, stretching from Capua all the way to Rome. This is like a Roman billboard, with signs pinned in intervals, visible to travelers, visible to merchants, visible to children. A constant public reminder that Rome held final authority over your body, your breath, your name, and the peace of Rome. Sometimes you would see Romans add a sign that would explain the crucifixion, the charges. And to Pontius Pilate, to Judea, to Jews in this area, there was a trigger phrase, King of the Jews. King of the Jews. This is the province that's been governed by King of the Jews, King Herod. King Herod, for decades, he really bribed his way. He made a deal with the Romans, and he wanted it for power. It started with King Herod the Great. he paid for it through the Roman kingdom deals. But the Romans gave it to him. And it's actionable political sedition if you claim kingship. If you announce a kingdom, like you say you're king of the Jews, it meant, well, the Romans didn't say that. And it could mean prosecution. It could mean you're guilty of an offense that deserves the cross. And Tiberius approves. He wants Pontius Pilate to keep people in line. He is in charge because he was adopted into it, and the Romans need to maintain this power that was started before Octavian, before Augustus. And the cross is the symbol that people saw designed to crush any alternative kingdom questioning the authority of the Romans. Pontius Pilate had the authority for Roman engineering. We need roads, we need aqueducts. And at the time he expanded the water system, the aqueduct system, he used the people's offerings in the temple money to build the aqueduct and for Roman engineering. The Jewish population was outraged. This is sacred money. Tens of thousands marched against Pontius Pilate, against the Romans. But Pilate was ready for them. Pilate had stationed his soldiers in the crowd, disguised in civilian clothing. They carried clubs under their robes, and at the signal, the soldiers attacked. They beat protesters down to the ground, right in their own streets, and that was from Pilate. That was his message. That's justice. Subordinate. That was Pilate's message, that a public protest will be met with this type of violence. And crucifixion could be next. So welcome to Rome's Pax Romana and the way they keep the peace. If you're coming here from Lesson 59, that was the first of this trilogy. This is the second lesson. Jesus has already been in Jerusalem for a few days. He is arrested. There are different levels of authority. Let me tell you about Pontius Pilate's courtroom. Jesus will be dragged there in chains. Pontius Pilate is literally in Herod's palace. That is his temporary headquarters, since he doesn't normally work here. King Herod Antipas is the son of Herod the Great, the next generation, the king of the Jews, according to the Romans. But not just King Herod is the one with a classical kingdom conflict with Jesus of Nazareth. The Jewish religious leaders have also challenged and charged Jesus. They accused him of sedition. What is sedition? Jesus was accused of the crime to create a revolt against lawful kingdom authority with the intent to override, to overthrow, to destroy. And because of Jesus's kingdom teaching in front of large crowds, speaking about a kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of heaven, his followers had begun calling him a king. That word king is technically enough to activate the jus gladii, remember the law of the sword, because Romans are supposed to be in charge of handing out titles and kingdoms. Pilate now has a chance to question Jesus. Pilate's tribunal, are you the king of the Jews? Pilate says this. And Jesus answers calmly, my kingdom is not of this world. Pilate must feel the might of someone who speaks back to the Roman authority, says, my kingdom is not of this world. That Pilate is operating the kingdom. He works hard. He's running this with wood and iron strength, troops, coercion, roads, crucifixion. All of it. And Pontius Pilate hears Jesus describing a kingdom that runs on something entirely different. A kingdom of voluntary belonging, of adopt. You can get adopted into the kingdom and be an heir like a firstborn son. It's a kingdom of grace. You don't deserve it. It's a gift. But in Pilate's Jerusalem job, those two kingdoms collide. We've got the Roman one God problem colliding with this overlapping kingdom. Empire meets gospel. And Pilate is stuck. He cannot find a legal, he can't actually find a capital case, a capital crime here, because he's the one in charge of capital cases. What is a capital case? That's a death penalty case. If he's going to appease the mob, there's a crowd outside. The Romans are good at dealing with the mob, and they're getting heated. And Pilate can't afford another riot like the one we just talked about. Tiberius is watching, and Pilate wants to keep his job. Pilate looks for a way out. And there is. It is Passover. This week is Passover. It started with what is called Palm Sunday now, but as the lambs are brought in, they're brought in for inspection in the temple. And then by this day, the Passover it's begun. And so there's a Passover tradition that is something Pilate is able to release one prisoner that the crowd chooses, that the mob cheers for. And he gives them a choice between the two, because on one side is Jesus of Nazareth, and on the other side, a violent insurrectionist. His name is Barabbas. The Greek word for him is lestatse. That's a bandit or a guerrilla fighter, a man of the sword who has used that sword to kill a Roman. And his name, Barabbas, literally means the son of the Father. Pilate is offering the crowd a choice between two sons of the Father, one who killed a Roman with a blade and the other who teaches about a kingdom who's not of this world. And the crowd chooses the Roman killer Barabbas to be freed. But while this is happening at the palace with the mob, something else is happening in a courtyard by Caiaphas' house. Caiaphas is the ruling Jewish authority. And if we go there, it's a cold night in Jerusalem. It's chilly in this courtyard. They've got a charcoal fire. And a Galilean fisherman, Simon Peter. Simon Peter is warming his hands. There's a charcoal fire there. The smell of the smoke and the crowds, people are up in arms. There's a lot of stress. Jesus has been arrested. He's being taken to authorities. Just hours ago, Simon Peter had told Jesus, even if all the others fall away, I will not. Peter had drawn a sword. He had cut off a soldier's ear. Peter was ready to fight for this kingdom. But now, here in this courtyard, fear paralyzes him with Roman soldiers nearby. Somebody identified Simon Peter, said, "You were with him. You were one of those with Jesus." And 3 times he was accused, and 3 times he denied it. Peter says, "I don't know." He swears, "I don't know who this guy is." And then this rooster crows. That was when Peter remembered that Jesus had even said, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. This upsets Peter. It is a moment to test if this kingdom is real that Jesus has been teaching about. And for Peter, one of the top disciples, apostles, the follower of Jesus, maybe you have had a moment like this, maybe much smaller. How did you choose? What do you think about Peter in this situation? Drop a comment about it or share your own, when you hear these tough questions. And I've seen kids since the 90s, they learn from others' experiences. The people can share a eureka moment, and we'll hear Peter's eureka moments later. So share yours in the comments, and please subscribe. Click the like button. It really helps the channel by subscribing. The whole classical approach will be available to you lesson by lesson. They all stitch together. And every minute we spend together has to count, like to get to know Pontius Pilate even more. Because Pilate's verdict leads to an interesting reaction. Pilate ceremoniously washes his hands of this case. Now, the crowd said, "We want to free Barabbas." And the crowd demanded the crucifixion. That's what ended up happening. He sent Jesus off to be to be scourged first, and then the process of crucifixion. It's a long process. It's humiliating. It's painful. And here's this painting when Pilate says, "Behold the man, ecce homo." And even Jesus has a crown, the cost of that crown, because you said you're a king. It's a crown of thorns. Now, Pilate, he's washing his hands. He's washing his failure of virtue. He didn't see a capital crime here, but he's trying to keep his Jerusalem job. And, we're going into a holiday weekend. He had all kinds of pressures from the different political groups, the calendar, Tiberius. So Pontius Pilate, washing his hands, gives Jesus over to the soldiers. And as I mentioned, the scourging happens. That's the whipping, these bits of bone and metal that are embedded into the tips of the cat of nine tails that shreds the flesh. And then the public march and this crossbeam that Jesus is carrying through the streets of Jerusalem. Of course, pilgrims now followed this path to the hill outside the city walls, where he is nailed and humiliatingly hoisted up on the cross with other criminals. And for hours, right, waiting for suffocation. Jesus dies on this Friday afternoon. His body is taken down before sundown. He dies before his legs are broken. His legs are not broken, which for Christians connects to the Passover lamb, the mention that we had of the previous lesson, the Passover lamb. Jesus is buried in a tomb that's owned by a wealthy supporter. And a Roman seal is placed on that tomb, on the tombstone that sealed it in position. And there's a Roman guard, multiple Roman guards there, because Rome has spoken, and Rome will not have it, will not allow kingdoms to rise up. And so back to Peter. Peter, in the meantime, goes back to Galilee and goes back to the fishing boats. It seems he's lost hope or doesn't know what to do next. He's back to the fishing life that he knew before he met the traveling teacher, Jesus. And he saw Jesus die, right? Jesus, the leader of this kingdom movement, is dead. And right here, the easy road disappears. The empires won, the Romans won, it seems. But for the Christian faith, the Bible reveals the longer journey. And I want to make you a classical scholar. You want to understand the Christian perspective, understand these events in their own terms, not in 21st century perspectives, but how they viewed it. Because to a Christian, the empire did not win. The empire has not won. Roman authority over crucifixion, Roman authority over death. Jesus overrules it. 3 mornings later, the tomb is empty. And weeks later, Peter is back on the Sea of Galilee, fishing. He had worked all night. He caught nothing. He sees a figure standing on the shore. The figure calls out, "Throw your net on the right side." The other side of the boat, Peter does it, and the net just fills up, becomes so heavy with fish, it nearly breaks. And that is when Peter realizes who it is, that this is Jesus. He didn't wait for the boat to reach the shore. He jumped overboard. He swims. Peter pulls himself ashore, and he smells it before he sees it. Jesus has made a charcoal fire to cook some fish. And that's the same charcoal smell from Caiaphas's courtyard when he was in the virtue forge and failed. The smell of his greatest three failures, the denials. But this is a new scene with Jesus cooking breakfast. He does not demand the pledge of loyalty. He does not lecture Peter about cowardice. He asks him a simple question, "Simon Peter, son of John, do you love me?" Peter says, "Yes, Lord. Feed my lambs." Then Jesus asks again, "Do you love me?" "Yes, Lord. Tend my sheep." And then a third time, "Do you love me?" And now Peter is hurt. He's, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Feed my sheep." Three questions that cancel those three denials. This is the system test of the kingdom of heaven. Roman adoption demanded merit, usefulness, and a clean legal record, and Peter doesn't have that. But this kingdom, Jesus, demands none of that. The kingdom has absorbed Peter's failure, and Peter is no longer that previous kind of hothead defender of what he thought was supposed to be a political fight, an army fight. He is now a restored shepherd. Tend my sheep. And so what does this mean for Simon Peter's legacy in the future? Peter now begins a ministry, having seen the risen Lamb, having seen this kingdom have higher authority than the Romans. Peter is ready to walk straight into the center of Roman power. So one of his travels to Caesarea Maritima, that's Pilate's old capital. And he enters the home of a Roman centurion named Cornelius. He was a commander, actually from Italy. And it's like Peter was carrying this lesson. And finally, Peter sits at his table. He shares food with Cornelius and proclaims that Cornelius, a Roman soldier, and his whole household belongs to the new kingdom, to the new family, is adopted in. The kingdom of heaven has just crossed over into the Roman boundary, quite literally, with a Roman soldier. Another empire meets gospel. And from there, Peter's lesson is traveling across the Mediterranean, spreads across the sea to Antioch. Around 50, Antioch is where Christ followers are first called Christians, to the Greek cultural hub of Corinth. Really, it's a Roman city at this point, one of the fifth biggest, and by the year 52, Peter is there. And then to Ephesus by the year 60. That's not only an influential metropolis, but the capital of Asia. Peter will find himself in Rome by the year 64, AD 64. That's a dangerous year for Christians, because in July of 64, fire swept through Rome. That's the Great Fire of Rome. And if you're coming here from lesson 57, you know Emperor Nero needs a scapegoat, someone to blame. He blames Christians for the fire, and Peter is there. Peter is among the targets. These paintings of Peter from the 1600s, like Guido Reni's painting of Peter, it shows the scene. And when Peter is punished, he is crucified by Nero's soldier in the year 67 on Vatican Hill. That's outside the Roman walls, across the Tiber River, near the circus of Nero. that would have been used for public spectacles, persecuting Christians using them in gladiator games. This painting by Caravaggio shows how Peter asks to be crucified upside down. He believes that he's not worthy to die in the same crucifixion posture as his teacher. His body is buried in a first century Roman necropolis on Vatican Hill. That necropolis, archaeologists have remarkably preserved beneath what stands there today. And you've probably seen Vatican Hill, you've seen Vatican City, you've seen now that is the seat of the Roman Catholic Church. And that church building you see is named St. Peter's. This is the fisherman who denied his teacher. Remember that second charcoal fire on the beach. That was the transformation of Peter. To Roman Catholics, he was transformed into the first pope. It's a completely different ending than Peter might have expected. He doesn't earn his way into a classical kingdom by being flawless or by being successful. He was adopted, gifted through restoration and grace. And that is a lesson you'll see if you visit Vatican, if you see Rome. And that's how classical scholars are made, one lesson at a time. This is just the second stage about Rome's one God problem. The next lesson will complete that. We'll take a different side about the Jewish temple and what happens to Jerusalem in the year 70. But the classical approach is so important, guiding you in truth. Check out classicalkingdoms.com. That can help you learn to think and what to do as we map out your entire classical journey. And I'll let Peter have the last word here. It's written from Rome, from the very shadow of Nero just before his own death. Be sober, be vigilant. Your adversary walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Because in lesson 61, our next lesson, the kingdom of heaven and the fury of Emperor Nero, it's about to ignite in a Jerusalem battle, in Judea. Thank you for taking the time to learn something that matters in all of history, and that includes your journey, because kingdoms rise and fall, power fades, but virtue endures.